Hi everyone, I'm Sidra and today I'll be presenting my project, Family Routines in the Context of Homelessness. And this project was conducted with the help of my mentors, Dr. Ann Maston and Kara Lukey, under the Institute of Child Development. So just to give a bit of background information about this topic, several decades of research suggest that poverty can adversely affect child development. Children experiencing homelessness are often at heightened risk since they also experience poverty-related risks, as well as unique risk factors associated with homelessness, including residential instability, financial problems, and greater recent stressful life events. Despite these risks, children have the capacity for resilience. Resilience has been defined as the capacity of a system to adapt successfully to challenges that threaten the function, survival, or future development of the system. Family routines are important for child development, and they have been associated with better cognitive functioning. However, the context of homelessness can create challenges for caregivers to maintain consistent routines, and prior research has shown that other obligations, such as time spent finding alternative housing or employment, not being able to live with a partner in the shelter, and feeling like their parental authority and efficacy were compromised, can interfere with family routines. So the current study had two primary aims. The first aim of the study was to examine predictors of consistent routines among caregivers experiencing homelessness. And based on prior research, I expected that caregivers living with their partner in the shelter, caregivers who are employed, and parents with stronger perceptions of their own parenting efficacy would maintain more consistent routines. And the second aim of the study was to examine whether consistent routines while residing in the shelter are associated with more advanced child cognitive outcomes. And based on prior research, I expected that consistent family routines would be positively associated with child executive functioning and verbal IQ. So the sample we used consisted of 70 caregivers and their 4 to 6-year-old children currently residing in an emergency homeless shelter. And for the data analysis for the study, we used bivariate correlations, which evaluated associations between key variables, and 3 linear regressions were conducted to examine aim 1 and aim 2. So this included examining associations between previously identified predictors in relation to family routines in relation to child's EF, and family routines in relation to child verbal IQ. So 3 single items were used as predictors of family routines. We asked the caregivers if they were living with a partner in the shelter, and they would answer yes or no, whether they were employed or not, and they would answer yes or no. And then parenting efficacy was measured on a 5-point scale from 1 to 5, 1 being not well at all, and 5 being very well. And parenting efficacy is kind of how parents perceive themselves and like how well they think they're doing as a parent, how good of a parent they think they are. So the question we asked them was, compared to other parents your age, how well do you think you are doing as a parent? And then we also used a family routines inventory, and this was used to measure family routines. And this included 21 questions on a scale from 1 to 4, 1 being almost never, and 4 being always or every day. And again, this was to measure routines and see how consistent routines were. So some example questions included, do children go to bed at the same time almost every night? And do at least some of the family members eat breakfast together almost every morning? And we also looked closely at executive function, or EF, and this was a composite score of 3 tasks that measure EF. And the 3 tasks are peg tapping, flanker developmental extension, and dimensional change card sorting task, or DCCS. And these 3 tasks assess cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control, and working memory, which are all important neurocognitive skills that underlie EF. We also looked closely at verbal IQ, and verbal IQ was measured with the picture vocabulary test, which is a measure of receptive vocabulary. And the covariates for this study for the first aim were caregiver age and caregiver sex. And the covariates for the second aim were child age, child sex, and whether the child is currently in school. So moving into the results, going over the descriptive statistics, we found that 24.3% of caregivers were living with a partner in the shelter, 27.1% of caregivers were employed, 78.6% of children were in a school program, and parents reported moderately consistent routines and moderately high parenting efficacy. And there was a range of scores on child EF, and children scored in the 28th percentile for verbal IQ compared to population norm. And the correlations for AIM-1, we found that older caregivers had less consistent routines, male caregivers were more likely to be older and to live with a partner in the shelter, and parenting efficacy was associated with more consistent family routines. And for AIM-2, we found that family routines were significantly associated with more advanced child executive function, but not verbal IQ. Older children were significantly more likely to have higher EF and verbal IQ, and child EF and verbal IQ were strongly associated with each other. So in Table 2 and Table 3, you can see the results of the linear regressions we used. So the regression in Table 2 is for AIM-1, examining the predictors of family routines, and the regression in Table 3 is for AIM-2, examining family routines in relation to child cognitive outcomes. And in the first regression predicting family routines, parenting efficacy significantly predicted more consistent family routines, while employment and partner living in shelter did not. And this finding was partially consistent with my hypothesis. And in the second and third regressions, family routines did not significantly predict child executive function or verbal IQ. Rather, child age was the strongest predictor of both cognitive outcomes. To summarize, consistent with prior research, caregivers who had a stronger perception of their own parenting efficacy were more likely to have consistent family routines. Family routines were associated with child EF, but this relationship was not significant when controlling for child age. And the findings suggest that supporting the caregiver's capacity to parent may support overall family functioning, especially in the context of family homelessness. And I'd also like to thank the MSROP program for providing me with this opportunity to conduct this project, and to Heidi and Vicky for being there to help along the way. And I'd also like to give a huge thanks to my mentors, Kara and Dr. Maston. I wouldn't have been able to do this project without them.
Nice job, Sidra. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Questions now?
Hi, Sidra. I just had a question. Is there a reason why you focused on 4 to 6 year old children?
There's not a specific reason. That there were a lot of 4 to 6 year old children in the shelter, and that's like age, where there's a lot of development and stuff going on, a lot of like cognitive development. So that's kind of one of the reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
Hi,
questions?
Sidra. I was going to ask if you had any future directions for your project.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think for a future study, I was thinking that it would be interesting, since like in this study we found that child age was a significant predictor of child EF and verbal IQ. So I think maybe studying a little bit older children, like instead of 4 to 6 year olds, kind of looking at 5 to 7 year olds and 7 to 9 year olds, and maybe even a bit older, because there's not as much research in like adolescent psychology and stuff. So I think looking at a little bit older children could be really interesting.
Hi, Sidra. Thanks so much. This is a really interesting project. I was wondering, do you have any suggestions for people like running shelters or in administration for that to increase family routines or kind of foster these family routines? I know that's kind of a little bit out of the scope of this study, but have you had any thoughts about the actual impact of daily life in these places?
I think like just providing that environment and supporting the environment is really important. And sometimes like I noticed like based on prior research and stuff too, and like reading about it, it's kind of hard sometimes to have like those routines, because there's like a lot going on at the shelter, and there could be like strict times in place for like meal times, like strict bedtimes and stuff like that. And also like for parents and like other caregivers, there might be like workshops they need to attend, like for employment and like job fairs and things like that. So sometimes it could be like hard to maintain routines or like foster those routines. So I think like if it's possible in shelters and stuff to maybe like have a little bit more of a flexible schedule and things like that, that could help like foster those consistent routines.
Thank you very much. This is a really interesting study.
Thanks, Heidi.